to hate speech. One of the comments from our policy committee was a request to have this reviewed by some of our partners, the Nehemiah group and others. And I think hopefully Leslie can report back on that. One of our kind of points for that was we may not have it perfect, and I think we need to take action and get something in place to start with, but we wanted to make sure that we didn't have any blaring things that we were missing, and to get some feedback. So I'm hoping, Leslie, that you could speak to that a little bit, maybe.
Absolutely, because as I mentioned, we had a meeting with Percy Brown last week, and we spent much of our time discussing the draft of the policy. Because it is unique, as far as we can tell, we're not able to find another school district in Wisconsin that has specifically set anti-hate speech as a policy separate from the harassment policy. And we're doing this for many reasons, and the biggest one is to show how important we know it is to our students and the type of culture that we want to create. So as Percy read through, I think that his biggest points of feedback were related to the administrative guidelines, much more so than the policy language itself. Although he did have suggestions related to formatting, etc. However, our formatting is very much dictated by all of the policies that we have, and we don't necessarily intend to format one significantly different from all the others. However, related to the administrative guidelines, I think one of the things that I took away that was very important is the opportunity for students to write impact statements. And perhaps they're not in place immediately when they're reporting an incident where they're willing or able to write about how whatever happened to them impacted them. And it can be in many ways. We know the impact is social, emotional, as well as even impacting their ability to be academically successful if they don't feel safe in a school or in a classroom. But he said allowing students the opportunity to be extremely explicit about how this impacted them is important for the student who was victimized, and it's very important for us to continue to gain a greater understanding and also align consequences for students who commit acts of hate speech.
So is that something, Leslie, that would be incorporated within those guidelines? I guess I didn't look down to see if that was already incorporated in this version here.
No, because I think that the form that we actually use to help students report is something I think we'll continually refine.
Sure.
So it wouldn't necessarily be here exactly as it will be, but it is something that we intend to use. And we also want to point out that our students often, when they're reporting, are too upset to think ahead and fill out a form. So very often the form is the way for the administrator to make sure that they are collecting all of the relevant information and inputting it into the behavior system of Infinite Campus. So we want somewhere in the process, when the student is ready, willing, and able, to give them the opportunity to write a statement.
Just a point of clarification and protocol, what the board will be considering would be an adoption of policy 164. We do not adopt the administrative guidelines. We can comment on them, but that would not be subject of the motion tonight. And Anna, I think probably if this policy 164 has been approved, that's before us tonight, the proper motion would be on behalf of the policy committee to move the adoption of policy 164 as presented. So.
Perfect. Should I make that motion right now before further discussion?
Yeah, you make that motion now, and because it's coming from a committee, it does not need a second. So it's properly before the board for action at this point in discussion.
Okay. So I guess I would, as the chair of the policy committee, I would make a motion to recommend approval of policy 164, anti-hate speech, which was approved by the policy committee at our previous meeting.
Okay. Any discussion? And I'm going to walk through folks one at a time. It's a little easier than trying to see who's raising their hand. So I'll call on people as you go through. Troy, anything?
Steve, can I just make one further,
Sure can.
one further piece of information? There was a considerable amount of time spent discussing 164.01.2, which is the statement that reads, hate speech does not include educational materials or lessons that are used by the district or its staff in good faith. And this was a comment that really was of big value to the OEA group from the perspective that when we are trying to have a lesson on this, or if we're trying to explain and understand some of the anti-hate speech situations that you may that we don't want our teachers to be considered at fault for violating this policy when they are using it in good faith for educational purposes. The statement did end with the word within its curriculum, which we chose to strike to avoid any confusion that there would be intentionally having hate speech within a curriculum, or like that it could create confusion from parents or community members on what the intent was. So there was a lot of discussion related to that particular sentence, and we all felt better with the way that it reads right now, from the standpoint that there wouldn't be ramifications involved with staff if they are doing it for educational purposes. So I just wanted to make that point, that was one other change that was made by the policy committee. And then I'm done.
Thank you, Anna. Troy.
Thanks for that clarification, Anna. That was great, and I really like that line, that 164.01.2. I like that good faith statement in there. I thought that was a great addition. I wholeheartedly support this. I don't really have any questions. Interesting that we're the first district in the state to have a specific anti-hate speech policy, which I think it's great. I would just, I guess, accentuate some of the early discussions we had on this policy, in that we were wanting to take the adoption of this policy as an opportunity to educate our students. And I think we heard that loud and clear from Leslie's earlier discussion, that this all really is fitting for the times, and it helps us to provide that education to our students about social justice. So that's all I had.
Krista.
Thanks. First, I really want to thank Gina and Mike. They've spent a ton of time on this policy. It's complex. Everybody kind of does it differently, and so they put a ton of heart and soul into this. So I just wanted to recognize them. Second, just have a couple questions. One is, so this really covers hate speech, and so I just want Gina to talk for a second about how we cover hate behavior, and that's mentioned in the policy in terms of what other school district policies cover that behavior piece of it. So Gina, could you just chat a little bit about that?
Sure. And I have first on my agenda to thank you for your leadership on the policy, because it's been about 1.5 years, if not more, work in progress. But I think it shows the style that we have of really getting all of our stakeholders involved in this discussion, including our student groups. So thank you, Krista, very much. In terms of speech, we try to look at that in 164.01.1 and explain to people that speech, and speech is a very legal term, that speech is just more than words, that it can be gestures, it can be what you wear, it can be actions that you take. And so, that'll be a really critical part of the component, especially with educating our students about that it isn't just what you say, to Krista's point. In terms of looking at other districts, the districts we found that even had the phrase hate speech in them really did not elaborate or give further definition. So I feel like we are really the leaders in this area in terms of defining it as we have in the policy, which isn't to say that it can't be improved. And I suspect once we start working with our students and really implementing and enforcing the policy, that I suspect it will change over time. as we learn where we need the clarity. But we try to be all encompassing, that speech is more than just words.
Thanks. I think just two other questions I have. One is, the piece in here, and this is kind of where I equate it to the co-curricular code that we have, is that this is not just about when kids are in school. This is a 24/7, 365-day-a-year policy. And can you kind of speak to the legal part of that? Because I know that was a discussion we have, that can we really have a policy of anti-hate speech when kids are not in school? And so can you kind of talk to how that impacts the school environment when they're not in school if this occurs?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So we really, in the policy, there are several US Supreme Court cases on that talk about when you as a school district can really reach outside your brick and mortar walls. And so some of that's an easy analysis, like a school sponsored event, like a co-curricular. I think what's harder is with how kids are on social media, and that tends to be now where a lot of their speech is, which tends to be, perhaps like at home on a Saturday night. And so we really look to the Supreme Court to tell us when can we discipline in those circumstances. And there's really 3 times that we look at. One is if you endanger the health or safety of others at school. The second is if you create a substantial disruption to the educational environment. And then the third, which gets a little gray, is are you colliding with the rights of others? So what that boils down to is we look at the totality of the circumstances for each of these cases, and we look at what is the nexus or connection to school? What is the disruption to school? And so what I talk with kids about when incidents happen is that you'd still have First Amendment free speech rights, but you don't have the right to threaten someone. You don't have the right to harass someone. And so the courts and now DPI have really given schools more leeway to enforce actions that occur outside of school, because they know that even though it's outside of school, that the impact in school is very real for our staff and our students. And some of this is going to be a test with DPI, but DPI has very much shown in the last year or so of giving schools more and more authority to regulate off-school speech or conduct that impacts our educational environment. And I suspect with the times that we're in now, that I am very comfortable with our legal position in doing that.
Thank you. And I just wanted to point that out because I think that's one of the really, really important benefits of having Gina on staff, is this piece of, she really understands how we can put teeth into policy. And that's a really important point. So thank you, Gina. My only other question is, and maybe I missed it, but in the administrative guidelines, I didn't see when a parent becomes involved. So if a child commits a hate crime, at what point do we notify a parent? And maybe I missed that in there. So I just have that question.
Right. So I would say it depends on the nature of the action, Krista. If it would be something that would be a potential criminal action, then we would defer to our SRO MOU, and that we would contact the parent anytime before an officer is going to question a student. If it's something that we deem not to be a criminal violation and it's a school investigation, then again, depends on the, urgency of the circumstances, but we would certainly notify parents or guardians anytime their student is involved in this investigation, whether that be before the interview or after.
And sorry, I misspoke. I meant hate speech. So if someone I meant to say hate speech instead of crime. With hate speech, with the policy, at what point when you have an incident report does a parent called?
So at the minimum, after we would be done questioning the student.
Okay. Sorry, I misspoke.
No, but I think it's important in terms of that nuance, because we could have a situation where a speech incident is potentially criminal in nature if it's threatening.
Okay.
So there may be times that our SRO is involved in the questioning.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Kevin.
Yeah, so I'd start off with a question, and I'm a newbie, so maybe this is known to others. I just didn't know where to find it, but I'd like to understand better what Board Policy 157 is for further protection. Could someone summarize that for me, please?
Sure. So that's our non-discrimination and anti-harassment policy. And so hate speech would definitely fall under harassment. But so we tried to really mirror our investigation procedures in line with a 157 policy violation. But we wanted to really highlight hate speech and put it as its standalone policy. So it's a great observation on your part. And Steve and I talked about this a little bit, that we'll have to, we're going to have to revise policy 157 because Title IX has changed and those regulations. So this summer, the policy committee and I will be working on that. And so we will look at really making it clear how that relates to policy 164. So they definitely go together, but we wanted to specifically highlight hate speech and in a specific policy to show the importance.
Okay, thanks for that. I wanted some clarification on 164.01.2. So thanks for the background on that. It makes a lot of sense. And then the discussion we just had on 164.01.4. So this is the case legally, even if statements are being made that don't impact another student or the school district. I understand how it's not appropriate, don't get me wrong, but I'm trying to just understand from a legal perspective and what's the case that could be referred to, the Supreme Court case you mentioned.
So really, we always go back to the Tinker case. That's sort of the foundation of that. But really, with social media, more and more of this doesn't occur on school ground. And so I don't want to give an example that would be identifiable. But let's say I'll give a recent expulsion case, not in our district, where a student was on social media threatening other students at school, but it was a Saturday night, right? But talked about coming to school and harming those individuals. And EPI had said, based on the Tinker case, that the school could expel for that because you were threatening kids at school, even though the kids weren't at school at the time, that you were threatening to come to school and harm them. So, and as a lawyer, like that's a pretty expansive definition of others at school. So I think it just shows that DPI is relying on former precedent to say, okay, schools, like we hear you, and we're going to give you the ability to keep your kids safe at school.
Yeah, that example I totally understand because it involves school students, it involves the school. I guess what I'm looking for, and I understand why we might not want to share an example, but how that can be enforced when it's not involving a school student or the school itself.
Right.
Again,
So
I'm not suggesting it's right whatsoever. I'm trying to understand from a legal basis how that could be included in the policy.
So let's say you had a group of kids that were engaged out of school and using racial slurs, making gestures, threatening them. And then they come to school and they're upset, right? So they can't focus, they're anxious, they're feeling scared. They see these kids in the hallway, they have reactions to them. They tell their teachers, I can't focus, I can't learn, I'm so upset by that. That is then something we look at. Now you've caused a disruption to our educational environment. You're colliding with their right to learn. So we have to still have some nexus to our school environment. But usually in these cases, it isn't hard to show that it's having an impact on kids at school.
Makes sense. That's a helpful example. Thank you. I'm done.
Thank you. Tim?
Again, just a couple of things as I'm on the policy committee. So we had a lot of the discussions during the policy meeting. Just a couple of reminders. First of all, as Anna said, this is our first pass. It's a very focused first pass, but it's an evolving policy. We are going to learn from other best practices, and we're going to learn from our own experience with this policy. And as we go along, it's likely to be clarified as we go along. Secondly, as we talked about, there's some gray area here. The definition is broad. As Kevin mentioned, for instance, how do we reach that far, and where is the boundary? Because the boundary is very difficult to see. It's a gray area. And so we're going to find, I am sure, that definition around boundaries and what we can affect will be clarified along the way. Again, part of that evolving process. And lastly, because it's a relatively well-defined policy, it ramps things up well beyond from a seriousness than it has been in the past. We know that we've had lots of efforts around these types of discussions, but putting this policy in place ramps up the seriousness of an offense. And it's going to take both students, I think it's going to take both students and families some time to understand the seriousness of it and to be educated around how serious we are as a district in making sure this doesn't happen within our district. So just those three things. Again, please understand it's an evolving policy, and we're going to learn a lot in the coming months and years on how this can work best for us in our community. That's it for me.
Thank you, Tim. Heather.
Thanks. My one comment was just piggybacking on what Tim just said, and I should know this because I was also part of the policy committee meeting, but how are we informing families about this, or what is the plan in messaging this so that people can begin to digest and process and really put it into place, both outside of the school as well, not just with staff and faculty?
Absolutely. That is what Darcy Krieger and Mike Carr, that's the purpose, or one of the purposes of the committee that they're putting together post the passing of this policy, is to develop that.
Got it. That's part of that. So when we hear that by August 24th, then will that, assuming hopefully all is going well for in-person learning in September, then will families have access to that before school begins? I guess that's what I would, it'd be awesome if parents could have this, to what Tim was saying, I think, in advance, so that people can begin to digest and put this into practice. So does that mean that the August 24th date is enough time to communicate that, if we're looking at that?
By August 24th is when we'll have the plan. That doesn't necessarily mean that by that date, we will have communicated everything we need to our parents.
Sure.
Well, and
Yeah.
so I would add to that too, that one thing I really learned from Leslie is that we know it's not a one and done, right? We know it's a continuous training and conversation and learning and teaching with our staff and our students and our parents. And so Mike has started a really great implementation plan to look at all those different ways and different media that we could use, because we know this isn't something we can just roll out in August and then expect people to comply all year. So it's a great question on your end. I think you're going to see multiple media that we educate our students and staff with.
Okay, that's fair. Thanks.
And Heather, I can appreciate your the ambiguity here at this moment. I definitely can, because no parent wants their kid to suddenly realize there's a new policy in place the first week or the first month of school, and to see it ramped up so quickly. I'm not saying it isn't, we shouldn't ramp it up as seriously as it appears we are. We should do that, but the education has to be in so many different forms, both to parents as well as to kids in the district. And we need to give them some time to absorb that.
Heather, do you have anything else?
Nope, that was it for me. Thanks.
Okay.
Hey, Steve, this is Kevin. Are we voting on this tonight, or is it just being presented?
There's a motion to vote on it tonight. Okay. I'm supportive of the policy and will vote in favor of it tonight. I think there are some things that we need to think about in the next couple months as we move to implementation. So I want to identify those because, as people have said, this will be a moving document. So here goes with a couple of comments for folks to think about in terms of implementing the policy. This is a policy that most of what's covered in here probably would fit within policy 156 or 157, which is our harassment policy that rises out of Title IX, and also our anti-bullying policy 163. I'm convinced, based on the last couple of years and in particular recent events, that we need a separate policy that deals with this sort of conduct, not only to make sure that people understand how significant it is, but also to provide us with guidance in enforcement. Okay, and that was one of the reasons we started down the path of adopting a standalone policy. Notwithstanding that, I have some question about how we will interact between 156 and 163 in terms of complaints and investigations. 156 has some pretty significant investigatory processes and standards that have to be used in compliance with Title IX. I'm not sure whether we're molding those into this or adopting that. So Gina, that's something I want, as we move forward to processing this, something to think about, because that has significant legal ramifications for the district, because Title IX imposes liabilities on us under 156 and has standards by which standards that we have to follow. I'm not sure if we're imposing or grafting those onto 164, okay? And I'm not suggesting that we hold this up waiting for it, but I think that's something we have to consider, and also 163. For example, is a student going to be able to file a Title IX complaint and file a complaint under 164? If so, will we merge the investigations? Will they have the same standard? Okay. Some of this is pretty legalistic, and I think I see you nodding, Gina, that we're going to have to walk through as we move through this. Okay. But it's not enough for me to put a stoplight on, because I think this is so important to enunciate. My second point is in the second paragraph of 164.01. We identify a number of characteristics and criteria and status in the first sentence, but we don't list race. Okay, and yet down in 164.01.1, when in 1, we talk about language, gestures, or other actions such as, and we need the word as in that 1, such as using racial slurs. I'm wondering why race isn't up in that second paragraph.
Do you want me to answer that right now?
Yeah.
Okay. So, it's just interesting in terms of looking at the evolution of our thinking, because what we talked about for policy 164 is, as a policy committee, is we really wanted a preamble about what we stand for as a district. And so this language was taken from the path forward, because that's the last time the board got together to talk about really what we stand for. So I didn't want to modify that language from the path forward without the full board's input on that. But it is, it's just interesting, right? In terms of how much work we've done, I think, since the path forward to get to this policy. So if you want to know why race isn't in there, it's the language from the path forward. But I don't think the intent was that we, at any point, we're looking to, I think the intent of the statement that was approved before this, and the intent of this policy certainly is to encompass race. And that's why it's in 164.01.1.
Right. I think we should have race in that second paragraph, the first sentence, as we move forward. I get nervous. I'm looking at the third paragraph with words like in policy that says we will provide a safe, secure, and respectful learning environment. It certainly is what we endeavor for and strive for, but there are circumstances out of our control as a district when that can't happen, as regretful as that is. And so that's why I get nervous from a legal standpoint that this will create some sort of liability. So I'm nervous about that language. In the fourth paragraph, Gina, do you have any comment, or are you just taking notes?
Oh, well, so just so you know, I mean, one past did say the district strives to, and I think we just felt as a committee that we were going to be really definite about that language. So we had that exact discussion, Steve, in policy committee. So, I appreciate that you identified it because that's something we wrestled with too as a committee.
Just so everybody knows, I'm uncomfortable with that language because it creates a standard that we can't keep as much as we try. And that has potential legal liability issues. The fourth paragraph. The second sentence says the district expects the school staff will immediately intervene when observing any reasons. That same sentiment, that same reporting requirement or expectation is in 16404. That creates an affirmative duty on people, but it says anyone having knowledge of an action which they believe violates the above policy should report that. Okay, that's different word and has a different meaning than will. I think those should go hand in hand. If we meant will in 16404, we should say will. Okay, if we meant should, then we got to change the preamble in 16401 fourth paragraph.
Well, Stephen, I can just tell you our thinking behind the difference is that we felt really comfortable as a committee talking about the expectations for our staff as employees, but then in looking at 16404, that's something we really looked at as our school community. And so we really are going to work towards and hope that, for example, our students, when they see something, will say something. That's one of our campaigns, but just wanted to be sensitive to that there may be times when people aren't comfortable coming to us right away in terms of community members or parents or students, right? So that's the reason for the language. Open to you changing that, but that's the reason for it.
Right. But 16404 uses the word anyone, which encompasses staff. So technically staff has a conflicting standard there, and I don't know what the expectation would be. So that's something I think for further discussion. Does this cover actions or just speech or communication? Because in 16401.1.1, it talks about or other actions. And I heard earlier in the conversation that this was only to cover communications, verbal or otherwise.
No, it's more than speech. It's the legal definition of speech in terms of language, gestures, wearing, displaying items, just using technology.
Okay. I'm concerned about the language and take a look in the future on this as to whether or not, such as using racial slurs, whether we're limiting that language, gestures, or actions only to race-based, whether that modifies that language so it limits it just a race-based type of action or any of the actions above that, okay? And I would think in board policy 157, if we're gonna, instead of just referring to board policy 157, I think in this policy, we should specify any additional classifications that are set forth as governed by this policy, instead of just referring it to 157, so that it's clear.
Well, and those are encompassed, all of them are encompassed there. The thinking is just that if we were to change board policy 157 first, that it would be included.
16401.2 talks about the educational materials, and that helps. That the intent of this isn't to interfere with legitimate, good faith educational processes in the classroom, and that it's necessary that we need to explore these issues with our students, and sometimes that means using speech or verbalizing through curricular materials, speech which might be covered by this. I'm thinking about what happened in Monona Grove. Okay, that sort of using that book, the Huck Finn stuff, that this isn't designed to prevent that sort of curriculum choice. Is that accurate?
Yes. Would you like me to speak to that, Steve?
Pardon?
Would you like me to speak to that, or?
I just want to make sure. I just think it's an important part of the educational piece in terms of learning about the impact of this, to understand how people have been impacted that through curricular materials, whether it's literature or others. And sometimes there's only one way to teach that. And then well, that's not correct either. There's a lot of ways to teach that, but sometimes it includes material that would run counter to the definition of hate speech here. So Leslie, yeah, if you could speak to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what we're trying to do with the implementation plan is make sure that we're being really thorough about what constitutes hate speech. And that phrase, in good faith, is really meant to remove barriers that teachers may feel related to on-the-spot addressing of things that they're seeing, or of curricular choices they're making, to make sure that everybody has everybody understands the history behind some of the words that students use or students hear as slurs.
Right.
So yes, that it is very broad in the statement, and in good faith was added to ensure that we are able to make some choices to make sure that we are really helping students understand why this isn't okay.
We have two specific board policies, well, at least one. 354 talks about the adoption of curricular materials, and it talks about controversial subjects. And I think we last adopted that probably in 2011 to 2013. With that, I'm assuming that if we have materials that have gone through the vetting process under 354, that would constitute in good faith under 164.01.2.
Absolutely, but I think there are some on-the-spot teaching opportunities that haven't necessarily been vetted through curricular programs like the subject area committees. There might be an opportunity for a teacher to address something that's happening right in front of him or her, and we want to make sure they have the tools to do it.
Okay. That's all I had on the policy. Just one comment on the guidelines, and Gina and I talked about this, but there are two different standards as to when we're going to notify parents or guardians. And so as you move through adopting these, in 164.04.01 has one standard in who we identify, and 164.02 has a different standard. So I just point that out as you move through adoption of administrative guidelines to look at that. Okay, that's all I had. Did any of the comments from anybody raise any additional questions or comment from any other board member?
Hey, Steve, this is Kevin. If I could just go back, I'm still hung up on 164.01.4. And I want to just say publicly, I'm certainly proud of being a part of a district that is taking this measure and taking a leadership. I think that's what Oregon School District is all about, and I'm proud to be part of that. But I want to make sure that we don't rush any part of this. I mean, if we're saying that Tinker is a justification for 01.4, Gina, unless I'm misunderstanding, I'm on ACLU's site, and I mean, this was about black armbands being worn to protest the war on school property. So I unless I misheard you, I'm having a hard time understanding how that's justification for enforcing things that we might not like that are not related to the school.
Well, and I think the end part of what you said is key, Kevin. So I would say first is every case that happens, we really analyze that as an administrative team, right? And then we will talk about that at some point as a board. So at some, like, you will have decision-making ability, whether that's in an expulsion hearing or whether that's in a closed session discussion with me. So I will say, like, we look very strongly to see if there is a nexus to school and causing a disruption to school or interfering with the rights of others at school. So we take that charge very seriously, and it's not something where we're looking to discipline kids for what they're doing if it has no connection to school. But the reason we feel it's important is because so much of the way kids communicate with each other is now on social media. That doesn't happen at school. And so we really want kids to understand that what you do on social media can have a tremendous impact on others at school and interfere with their rights at school.
Yeah, and I understand that, but and I get the gist of the overall statement, but would it be advisable to add an example of social media to make it more clear to people? And I think it just has to be a very strong statement that's related to and affecting people at school, because to me, that's a gray area, and you can't have it both ways with free speech from where I sit.
Nope, I understand, but I would say the legal precedent has evolved that people don't have a right to free speech to harass or attack or degrade one another. So particularly when that interferes with other students' rights to have an education, independent of whatever personal beliefs I might have, that is the way the legal precedent is going, as well as DPI and our ability to discipline students. That said, we have had a handful of incidents that have happened off school ground in the summer where that isn't conduct that we would condone if it happened at school or disrupted our school environment, but we have made that decision that the kid, while we don't think it's appropriate, that we don't have a right to discipline students in that situation. So we do a thorough analysis of everything that comes to our attention. And that is something that as a board, you will have decision-making ability in those cases on a case-by-case basis.
Kevin, when that
kind of helps, I just want to be helpful to state social media is one example. I think that's the most relevant, to me, the most relevant example when it happened. Thank you.
Yeah, Kevin, just to kind of fill in a little bit, we do get expulsion in disciplinary cases as a board from time to time that involve off-campus activity, and we look at that really hard to see how strong that connection is. I mean, it's a standard that has to govern us in expulsion cases, but it's pretty similar to the First Amendment standard that's been articulated. I share your concern that once we go out, I mean, we've got to be very careful about that, and we really have to make sure people know that, you may be subject to discipline if you're engaging in this type of behavior that impacts others, and because that's kind of a new thing, I think, for
yeah, it's impossible to unfortunately separate social media from school, right? I mean, kids, their friends are on social media, so they see it again, and maybe it's not necessary. Maybe it makes it more clear that that's a really, really strong example on how it's just absolutely not acceptable, even if you're off school property or even not during the school year.
Right, and one of the concerns I have is not, it's from that end, but also, and concerns may be too strong a word, but does this create an affirmative enforcement standard for administrators to be looking at social media and to reviewing what's happening, or are we going to look just when we have knowledge, and is that knowledge going to be the same standard that's applied in Title IX, in terms of when we have knowledge to move forward? Those are things that really got to be flushed out. But I think the principal one is what Kevin's talked about, is if we're going to have this as a standard, the students better know that that's the standard.
I would suggest that if we're talking about edits to the policy, like some of the things you talked about, Steve, that's great. If there is uncomfortable legal things that this should potentially be referred back to policy, and that Steve, you and Kevin should attend the policy committee meeting so that this stuff can really be delved into in policy. So I think, we're at that point of, are these critical points that cause you to say, maybe this should not be approved tonight? If so, then I would say you guys really need to attend the policy committee meeting so that these things can really be decided and discussed in that meeting.
I indicated at the beginning that I was comfortable voting for it. I just had, as we move forward with this document, there are areas that are gray that can be flushed out, because they're just going to be anyway as we move through implementation.
Well, and there's no policy that's perfect. There's always going to be adjustments that can be made, learnings from it. We just have to be open to that, and maybe clarifications like the one I'm talking about when it comes to social media as an example. It doesn't mean I'm not comfortable voting for it. It just means that we have to, of course, stay on top of the actual agreement as we learn moving forward.
Any other comments?
This is Anna. I would, I guess of all the points that you addressed, Steve, I think an easy one would be to include the word race in that first or second paragraph. So I would make a friendly amendment to my motion to include an amendment to add the word race in the first paragraph of this first sentence of the second paragraph.
I think you'll just, it'll have to be, you are making a motion to amend the hate speech to include race, and then we'll need a second on that. So I think Anna's made a motion to amend the first sentence of 16401, second paragraph, to include race in there. Is that your motion, Anna?
Yeah.
Okay.
This is Tim. I'll second that.
Any discussion on that? Okay, call the roll. And the sole question here is whether we're amending 16401, second paragraph. Correct. We have not, this is not a vote on the policy, it's a vote on the amendment.
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Ms. Garrison?
Yes.
Mr. Mary?
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes.
Mr. Pinkert?
Yes.
Mr. Beck?
Yes, the motion on the table has been amended. The motion from policy is to approve policy 164 as amended by including race in the second paragraph. Is there any further discussion on the motion that's on the table from policy? Hearing none, call the roll.
Ms. Bijak?
Yes.
Ms. Garrison?
Yes.
Mr. Mary?
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes.
Mr. Pinkert?
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Mr. Beck?
Yes, motion carries 7-0 to approve policy 164, anti-hate speech. Thank you, Krista, for your work back when you were chair of policy and getting that draft together, and then Anna and the policy committee and moving this forward in such a timely manner. And it will evolve as we move through. Okay, policy 617. Is this one coming from policy?
Yes.
Okay, Anna, floor is yours.
Policy committee reviewed this with Gina at our last meeting, and our group did recommend approval as written. The intent here is a legal language to allow our district to continue to compensate employees who are funded through federal grants, similarly to how we are funding other positions in our district during this pandemic. I would make a motion to approve policy 617, employee compensation, federal grants, as presented to you for this evening's meeting.
Okay, and I've walked through the process again to see if anybody has any questions or comments. I just have one. The intent of this is, I think it's probably a federal requirement, Gina, that we adopt this.
It is, and I know it's a little bit strangely written. It is a model policy that was given to all school districts, so we felt we should adopt it as written since it was a model policy. But I understand that some of the language is a little bit awkward. But yes, it's a requirement that if we paid our employees during a shutdown, that we also paid employees funded by federal grants. We treated them the same. So Anna did a nice job of summarizing that. So I'm impressed.
It reads as a model policy that some bureaucrats have vetted out, but I'm okay with it, even though I'd write it differently. Okay, let's go through. Heather, any questions?
No, I'm all set. Thank you.
Okay, Tim,
No questions for me.
Kevin,
None here.
Anna,
No questions.
Krista,
Nope.
Troy,
No questions.
okay. We have a motion from Policy Committee. It does not need a second to adopt Policy 617 as before. So could you call the roll?
Ms. Bouchard,
Yes.
Ms. Garrison,
Yes.
Mr. Waring,
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan,
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz,
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun,
Yes.
Mr. Beck.
Yes, motion carries. We have a policy. Congratulations, Anna. You got your first two policies passed as chair.
She's a hard worker, that Anna is.
Yeah. Others have not been so lucky. All right, that takes us to action C4, employee handbook revisions, section 0502 probationary period. Is this coming from policy or from Gina?
Well, policy and Gina.
So did policy vote on this and recommend it move forward?
Yes.
Yes, we did.
Okay, so Anna's back on. I was a little premature. You're 2 for 2. We'll see how it lasts.
Right. So our policy committee also reviewed a revision to the employee handbook at our last meeting. The intent here is to look at modifying or extending the probationary period for new staff related to the fact that our in-school sessions ended sooner than when their probationary period was up. And so this allows for the extension of that probationary period to give them more time to be in class and have those reviews completed by their supervisor. And this would be done in communication with that educator as well as the evaluator and HR. Our policy committee did recommend approval of this. There was support, or there was a lot of interaction with OEA on the specific language that was included here. And Gina was able to work with them to get some language that could be supported by the OEA. I would make a motion to recommend approval of the language inserted into the employee handbook for a revision to section 6.05.02 probationary period as included in your packet.
Terrific. And that coming from policy, it does not need a second. Any questions? Troy? Krista?
No questions.
Krista?
No questions from me.
Kevin?
No.
Tim?
No, no questions.
Heather?
All good, thanks.
Yep, neither do I. Call the roll.
Ms. Bouchard,
Yes.
Ms. Garrison,
Yes.
Mr. Waring,
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan,
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz,
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun,
Yes.
Mr. Beck.
Yes, motion carries 3 for 3 on the. That takes us to C5, CISA contract, 2020-2021 CISA contract. This is a regular item that we have on our agenda each year. Who's going to introduce this, Brian? Is this you or?
Sure.
Go ahead.
This contract looks very similar to the current school year contract. We purchased some services for special education, and Dr. Widensee has reviewed it and identified the proper services for next year. So we're seeking your approval so we can sign the contract and send it to CISA 2.
Okay, any questions from anybody?
Yes, I have a question.
Tim?
This is Tim. Brian, has anything significant been added to the CISA services? Again, it's a cooperative education, a set of services that CISA provides. Has there been any significant addition? Oh, Candace, maybe you can help me with that.
No, the only thing that we're contracting with them for currently is audiology. That's consistent with last year as well.
All right. Thank you.
Anybody else with any other questions? Okay, I need a motion to approve the 2020-2021 CISA contract as before us this evening.
It's Krista. I'll move approval.
Is there a second?
Tim, I'll second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, call the roll.
Ms. Flanagan.
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun.
Yes.
Ms. Garrison.
Yes.
Mr. Marion.
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz.
Yes.
Ms. Fidzak.
Yes.
Mr. Zak.
Yes, motion carries. The contract is approved. Moving to C6, resolution establishing a long-term capital improvement trust fund 46, and I think this is Andy. And Andy
It is.
discussed this before, and it's coming to us for action tonight. Andy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, I'm just presenting this back from the last month. Same concept that we talked about before. I did include, as I believe Tim suggested, exploring possibly utilizing this for computers in the future, and I think that has some real possibilities. I didn't see anything in the information on DPI's website that would disallow that, but I would like to confirm with staff before we obviously include that. We have plenty of time to work on that because we really won't be able to spend any money out of the fund until 5 years after it's established. So this would be, I believe, counted as the first year if we adopt it tonight. And then we proceed for the next 4 years where we can put a little bit of money into it when possible, and then be able to spend it after that point in time. So I'll just leave you folks some time to kind of ask questions at this point in time, and happy to try to answer them.
The intent, Andy, for minimally funding it now is that the real benefit isn't until that 5th year when we can actually spend money out of this, and would be to use some of our capital maintenance monies to fund it then.
Yeah, I really see us once we get to that 5th year, or perhaps even a couple years before that, if we have some money left over from the 600,000 that we allocate for that purpose that maybe we don't need in a particular year, we could throw those funds into this. Throw is a wrong term. Deposit those funds into this account, and then utilize that funds down the road.
You've been always accused of throwing money around, Andy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Andy, I've got a question for you. So if we put $10 in that account this year, just for instance, and we put $1,000 in the account next year, 5 years from now, do we have access to $1,100 or to $10?
I believe it's from when it established it, so it'd be the $1,010. Were you trying to trick me there?
No, I'm just wondering if every annual deposit is accessible 5 years after we've made it.
No, my understanding is all the funds available that were deposited in the fund during that entire 5 years are available.
Okay, great. Just wanted to make sure. I assumed that, but I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Andy, I have one question. We've talked about ordering one-on-one computers, additional computers, and it looks like we're doing that. Where is that money coming from?
So the plan right now is to utilize funds that were going to be unspent this year. So as we've talked about it last month, my anticipation is that there will be significant amount of money that isn't spent, and what will happen at the current plan is that those funds will then go into fund balance. And so when I bring the budget to you, the budget will include spending that fund balance. So there'll be dollars allocated or budgeted in the expense side that won't be matched with revenues because of the deposit that we will end up making at the end of this year. In addition, we do have some federal dollars that we finally found out about 2 weeks ago from the CARES Act, which was the first federal stimulus program that was adopted, and we're around $99,000 for that fund as well. So it'll be a combination of that, but I can tell you that we will spend well over $500,000 kind of filling the gaps for both staff and students K-12.
Thank you. Any other questions on the plan before us. Okay, I would need a motion to, one question I had, Andy, is that you've got the estimates in the outgoing years of potential expenses that will exceed the $600,000 that we have. I'm assuming that those are just identification for purposes of this plan, and that we would have to do some reevaluating of exactly which of those we're going to spend. It doesn't commit us to spending that.
Absolutely correct. And understand that, that we're trying to project out 5 years. Some of those projects might have to come within the next 5 years. So I think what I anticipate happening is perhaps we bring the long range capital plan at the same time that we're bringing the annual capital plan. And then we can just see how those two interact with each other.
Thank you. So I'd entertain a motion to approve the long-term capital improvement trust fund 46th plan.
I'll make a motion to approve the long-term capital improvement trust fund and approve the long-term capital improvement plan as presented in the board packet.
Is there a second to that motion?
Tim, I'll second that.
Any discussion from the board? Hearing none, could you call the roll, Katie?
Mr. Pankratz,
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun,
Yes.
Ms. Garrison,
Yes.
Mr. Marion,
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan,
Yes.
Ms. Bijak,
Yes.
Mr. Zak.
Yes, motion carries. Thank you, Andy, for working on this, and I think Zane also helped in terms of delving the plan. It's a prudent financial step forward for the district. All right, that takes us to committee reports and their discussion items. D, on a policy.
Nothing real to report. I know that we've got a couple of things on the docket that Gina has explained. So there will be more work. I think we're looking to meet potentially in July. So we'll be meeting in July, and my plan is to make sure everyone is aware of that meeting, so that if anyone wants to participate, we've got that we're giving you that opportunity to know that it's happening and join us.
Thank you, Anna.
Yeah.
For your work in bringing materials for us tonight to approve. Vision Steering Committee, Troy.
So we have a meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning at 7:45 a.m. 3 agenda items. First one is to discuss the path forward on our strategic plan. So something we've been talking about for quite some time. We're going to start to tackle that. Second item is to begin discussions on the planning for the implementation of our anti-hate speech policy that was just approved this evening. And as part of that implementation, Leslie and I were talking earlier that we would like to present the board with a book recommendation on anti-racist type of book study that we could collectively read, and then hopefully we would discuss that at our board workshop in July. So we will, as a vision committee, we will discuss that tomorrow, and then probably come back or communicate with the board as to what that selection is. So if anyone has any thoughts on that, feel free to reach out to me or Leslie. And then last on the agenda for tomorrow, we'll be planning for the board and administrator workshop in July. So it's scheduled for July 27th.
Great, thanks. Heather, I know that you have been reading on this subject and will have some recommendations for Troy. And I think you're planning on participating in the meeting tomorrow or remotely attending?
I will be, but I won't be on video just because I have my kids in the morning. So, but I will be listening and can probably get their attention elsewhere if I need to say a few quick things. But yes, I look forward to listening.
Yeah, and I know that you bounced off of me a couple books and I bounced them off of you. So feel free to share those tomorrow when you talk with, when you're on board with the visioning committee.
Will do. I think Leslie has read all of them, so she could really be the expert, but certainly will, I'll bring those to the table.
Great. And I think it would be really good that we pick a book to read, as we move through the summer, as we move to our workshop. Okay. So thanks for you guys bringing that to our attention, Heather and Troy. Krista, I know, has had a few books as well that she's read and bounced those off. Okay. I've got one that I'm reading on the migration north that won a bunch of awards, but it's 900 pages, so I don't think I'll recommend that for a board summer review.
Thank you.
Thank you. No kidding.
Cliff notes.
Your face was funny, Tim, when I said that. Yeah. Okay, good. Any questions of either Anna or Troy about the committees? Okay. I've got an application for appointment to the village board, park board. Anna, Krista, and we should talk about that. I've talked with Mike Grace to see what the deadline was. As of last week, there was no deadline. They were thinking maybe sometime in July, but we should talk about, getting one of us on an application for the park board so we maintain a school district presence on that board now that they've eliminated the official board seat. So I'll work with you on that, okay?
Okay.
All right, that takes us into informational items. We're going to E2, Youth Sports and Athletics Task Force update, and that's Mike.
Correct.
Hi, Mike, are you on?
I'm on. I'm here.
Take it away. I'm gonna go
Yeah.
some water.
If I gave Andy $10, how much would I get back?
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about youth sports for a minute. And Katie is going to drive for me.
Trying.
All right, so for the new people, you can go to the next slide, Katie. We'll start. So for the new people, we put together the Youth Sports Task Force in 2017, and that included 14 members of the community, 6 which were teachers, coaches, and administrators in the district, and 8 were parents or community members. Krista and I both chaired that committee, and we did about a year-long study and collected a lot of information about youth sports, because we know that youth sports are important in Oregon. And we also know that youth and athletics are important at the high school and middle school level, because we do a really nice job of supporting those two things through the district. So in 2018, we surveyed both parents and students, all the parents and all the students in the district about participation in sports. And we wanted to make sure that we were getting a clear picture of access and equity. We also wanted to benchmark participation, and we also wanted to know why kids were participating or not participating. So that was one of the first recommendations. So we've kind of kept that as a bank of data that we've been using with both our parent group and our consortium group, which are the two next groups, or the 2 recommendations that came out of that. So we also formed a consortium that pulled together all of the youth sports groups to kind of use that as a think tank and a best practice motivator. Let me go back just 2 seconds. In 2005, there was a youth sports task force, and then this was kind of the 2.0 version. So we wanted to bring in all of our youth sports people and kind of use them as a resource collectively. And we wanted to talk about coach preparation and communication and how different sports use age appropriate development and seasons. And then the third one was to create an advisory council. And this was a group of parents who were putting together and are putting together information to help new parents or new sports parents deal and be educated on child development and make sure that their experience are centered in learning. So we want to try to make the best sports culture for our kids and our community. And we use these three kind of prongs of a fork to get to that. So if you have questions during this, you can ask me, or we can save questions till the end. So the Parent Advisory Council has gotten together. The last time they got together, and as everybody knows, we've kind of had to push pause on sports for a little bit, but they got together last fall and they completed the concept of it's their game. And that was really based around their education is going to be based around it's the kids' game, it's not the parents' game, and kind of the education behind that. So they brought this logo to us in last fall when they gave their last committee meeting. So they've created that. They've also done their marketing and materials, and they're implementing. We just weren't ready to implement anything this spring because March 14th, kind of everything stopped. So their next steps are to make some videos with OCA Media, and then they're going to launch their campaign, hopefully the fall of 2020. So the Youth Sports Consortium, this is a group of all the youth sports groups in Oregon. And I help facilitate that group, but there are a lot of great people in that group that I don't need to do much in that group. It's more of just getting people together. So what the things that we're working on, we last met in September or October, and then we will meet again in July. So the next steps that we're working on with the consortium are kind of the returning to play plans for the fall, which is really important. We are going to meet in July, and then we're doing coaching education, and I'll talk more about that in August. And the things that they really wanted to talk about as a group was parent expectations. So we're going to kind of do some work with the parent group. And then player expectations, because those can kind of be inconsistent. So we're going to try to put those together. And player safety, that was another thing where some groups do things well and some don't know what to do. So they've been leaning on each other. And then we're going to continue to use the data of the first bank that we talked about to help determine some more best practices. The thing that is great about the consortium is they work very well together. They support each other. I was talking with Krista today about you see more and more groups supporting other groups or making sure that we try to do multi-sport. So there's really a lot of good free flow information there. And I feel that we're meeting the goal of getting those people together and using best practices. So that's been a really good thing.
Hey, Mike, this is Kevin. Just out of curiosity, how many people are on the parent advisory board?
I think we have 10 or 12. Okay. And Don Goltz and Tim Erickson are the co-chairs of that. Great. And then they're kind of going to disseminate that to the different sports groups when they roll that plan out in the fall. But we would love to have you as a member if you would like to be. So then I just want to go over some participation data because I think this is really important, especially for the new people, because a significant percentage of our students participate in sports, and we have over 25 athletic programs in the middle school and the high school. And I don't have great participation data this year because we had a whole season that was wiped out, but I'll share with you what we've done in the past. But in the fall and winter, we offered additional opportunities at the middle school in high leverage, high participation sports like volleyball and basketball. And then we added freshman teams in both boys soccer and girls volleyball because those are some high numbered sports. And then we added a JV hockey team. So the goal of adding those additional opportunities was to make sure or to ensure that we had more of a transition, a better transition for our freshmen, because we didn't want to have to cut kids. That's not to say we won't ever cut kids, but we're trying not to cut kids. So we know that when kids are involved and kids are engaged, they do better in school, no matter what, whether that's sports, music, or anything else. So we wanted to make sure, especially in the fall, when we have volleyball and boys soccer, that's a really good way to help bridge that kind of newness into the high school community. Any questions on that? So this is last year, because last year was the year that we had the most complete data. So about 51% of our kids participate in school-sponsored athletics at the high school. So that's a significant number. And then the next slide shows that we have 252 kids, which is about 43%. And one of the things that we talked about a little bit in the school start stop time is we also have a lot of sports that aren't reflected in this that kids also do. Like in the middle school, they play soccer or they play lacrosse or they do things that we don't sponsor. So kids are busy. So these numbers, while we say 43%, the numbers are actually higher. It just depends on what we're sponsoring and what other people are sponsoring. So that's just a good kind of benchmark that almost 1 in 2 of our kids are participating in something. So that's really, really important. Then one of the things that we found in our research was we wanted to make sure that we gave our coaches more coaching education. And the coaching education that I did a lot of research on was more social emotional coaching, which is exactly the same thing that we're doing in the classroom. It's a lot of people can tell people how to throw a football or bounce a volleyball or do whatever. It's really, we wanted to make sure that we started to get to people, to get to our coaches and give them training in how to deal with their kids in the social emotional realm. And so we've partnered with 3-dimensional coaching, and the 3-dimensional is the heart and the head, where our coaches are learning more and more about how to deal with different things outside of their sport. And we have gotten fantastic feedback from this. We found that it was a really good growth opportunity, and most of our staff had done it the year before, and they did the certification course. So the certification course is about a 12-hour online course. And we were able to use that as some professional development for our teachers. And then we're enrolling the rest of our people in this course this next year. They're in it right now. And my goal is to have everybody have at least the certification course done by July 1st. And those people that had already had the certification course done do 2 additional courses, which are 2 really important ones, are creating culture and then the alignment between coaches and parents. Because we want to start looking with the research we've done and with what we're doing with the parent group, we want to use parents as allies and supporters rather than saying we don't want to deal with parents. We know that we have to deal with parents more and we have to create better relationships with them. So that's a really important spot for us. Any questions on that? And then we had 2 really significant student athlete continuing development programs. We had Kathy Wright-Eager from Purdue University come in and talk with our kids. She is the executive director of the John Wooden Leadership Academy. So that was a huge deal for us. She did a fantastic job. She's probably the best speaker that I've seen with kids. And she really talked about 3 things that were really important, I think, for our kids were building team culture and then what it takes to be a great teammate, because a lot of times we just expect kids to be great teammates. So she talked about that. And then she talked about this thing that I think resonated with a lot of people, and she called it rocking your role. And what she means by that is you need to find the role on the team that's best for you, because not everybody can do everything. So finding that role, embracing that role, and then kind of rocking it. So I think that was really important for our kids to hear, because I think a lot of times we push our kids to be the best or play the most or do whatever. And she really brought it down to a spot where it was really palpable for them to understand, like, yeah, I can be the best person that I can be in this spot. And then the second thing that we did, which was pretty significant too, is we hosted the Badger Conference Sportsmanship Summit, and we facilitated that. And we brought all 16 of our schools in. So we had over 160 people come to OHS in the fall, in October. And then we just did a lot of brainstorming, and we had kids get really real and talk about their experiences and what's acceptable and what's not acceptable and how they feel when kids don't treat them well on the court or the playing field. So that was really good too. So I think those were 2 significant student athlete things that we dealt with. that were really, really important and really time well spent. So I think this is probably like one of the best parts of what I want to talk about, but it's also kind of one of the saddest parts, because I think one of the things that was really, really important, and I really am so proud of our kids and so proud of our coaches, was the way that they handled the disappointment of canceling school and canceling sports seasons. When I had to take the call at 11 o'clock at night, the night before the girls had to play in the state tournament game, and then talk to their coach and send them the text that like, we're not playing tomorrow and you have to come home. Like, that was just heartbreaking. But I will say that the thing that I'm most proud of is that our kids handled it with class. Our coaches handled it with class. Our parents did a great job. So I'm really, really proud of those kids, and I'm really, really proud of the parents, and I'm really, really proud of our coaches. The second part was with spring sports, because we didn't know what we were going to do with spring sports. So I thought the thing that was really important was our coaches in every sport, and I'm not talking just spring sports, really connected with our kids social and emotionally. They had Zoom meetings, they had things where they were touching base. Like, I didn't even care what we were doing. I just wanted them to touch base with kids, because we were talking today, like, most kids are social, and if they lose that component, we wanted our coaches to reach out to them, and our coaches really answered the bell on that, and I'm really proud of the way that they handled that. And they also provided workouts, kind of all spring, not knowing if we were going to come back or what. So I think that they just did a super job doing that. And then just kind of some highlight awards that I think are really important. The girls basketball team, obviously we had some kids go to state in cross country and wrestling. We had 2 team championships in conference. We had 31 kids be all conference, but I think more importantly, we had 16 all state academic kids. So our kids are not only doing really well on the court or on the field, but they're doing really, really well in the classroom. For us to have 16 all state academic kids is a really big deal, and it's something that we need to celebrate. And then I think the other success is, while we kind of had to hit pause with both our parent and our consortium, I've been working with them. I've been working with the consortium people, especially the fall people, and they're ready to get back at it. So this is, while we've kind of stalled, I think people are ready to get back when it's safe and when we can. I think this time away has given people perspective, which has been good. And I think that our kids know that, you have to play as hard as you can, because you don't know if you're not going to play tomorrow or not. So I think while it's been really, really sad, it's also shown us some things that I think we don't know we would have been able to do. So I'm really, really happy with a lot of the things that we've done in this school year. And then as we look ahead to next year, I think this is kind of the unknown. But we've been really working hard with different people about creating a safe return to play. And we've been working, I sent out the phase 2 stuff today to our coaches with the Dane County Public Health information. The WIA is having a meeting next week, and the Badger Conference, I'm on a COVID task force for that. So we're really working on some plans, but everything's so up in the air that it's hard to plan when you don't know what you're planning for. So we're trying to cover all those different bases. So some of the things that we've been talking about is, how are we going to screen? And we don't know any of these things yet, but we're planning on it. Andy and I talked about buying thermometers today and things like that. Transportation guidelines, like that's going to be a big impactor if we don't have, if there's not a way to travel without having, right now the recommendation is 15 kids on a bus. So there's just going to be things that we're going to have to do different. We're going to have to make sure that our officials and game workers are safe, and obviously our kids first, but then our fans too. Like, what are we going to do with attendance, and how are we going to handle guidelines, and what do those numbers look like, and those sort of things. And then we also have to plan for if we go back to phase 1 and we have to stop right away. So we've kind of been hitting all these 5 bullets really hard as a group of athletic directors, and our athletic directors are some of the best around. I mean, the Badger Conference is a great conference, and I think that if anybody's going to get it right, the Badger Conference will get it right. So I think we're planning, but we don't really know what to plan for. but we at least have ideas that we're really working with. So those are kind of the successes and the challenges of 2020. So with that, I'll take questions.
Any questions of Mike? Thank you, Mike, for your presentation and update.
Steve, can I ask a quick question?
Go ahead. Floor is yours.
Mike, are you hearing, do you feel like the rest of the Badger Conference could be consistent in terms of summer activities leading up to fall and, teams get involved in tournaments and things like that?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we've talked about and I shared with the administrative team the other day is the Badger Conference is a very large conference. And what I mean by that, it's 16 teams, but it is in 7 different counties. So Dane County is definitely a little bit different than the outlying counties, and how counties are opening up definitely makes a difference. So there might be a school outside of Dane County that's doing more than we can do just because we're going to follow the guidelines of Dane County Public Health. So we are trying to, I think at the conference level, we'll try to be as consistent as we can, because I think we have smart people in the room and they understand that we want to be as consistent as we can because we want to be as fair as we can, but we also have to live with the guidelines and the situations that we're in. So I understand, like, nobody wants to get back to sports quicker than I do, but we have to make sure that we do it in a safe way and in a supported way. And in a way that we don't slide back into phase 1 again. I think that's the big thing.
Hi, it's Krista. Just a couple things. I want to thank Mike for really shepherding this. It's been a long journey, and a couple things is, as Brian, when we talked about this task force, is that we provide education-based athletics, and I think Mike really talked about how social emotional learning is really a part of our athletic program, like it is part of our school district, and that's really going to benefit our kids with that focus. That we really have challenged the community to step up in terms of what athletics is and what it means and what it's all about in this district. And as we found in a lot of other areas, the community really steps up when we challenge them to stretch their thinking. And then the third thing is, and this was a saying a long time ago from Marv Levy, who was a longtime coach of the Buffalo Bills, if you do the right things happen. And so I think Mike is really leading that we are doing the right things in our athletic programs. And so good things are going to happen. Our kids are going to win, and they're going to be successful in the things that are important about athletics: physical fitness, learning to be on a team, decision making, how to deal with stress and anxiety and loss. Those are things that are going to benefit our kids well past Oregon High School. So thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Thanks, Krista. Anybody else? Question?
Mike,
Hi, Tim.
I also want to hand it to you for, sticking our collective neck out to host that conference and have all of those people come to Oregon, because I think it really raises us up as a leader in the conference, and to host that and to eliminate some of the unknown for a lot of other coaches, I think is a real leadership that you brought to the table. So thanks for doing that.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Just a quick comment, Mike. Thanks for the presentation. The thing that kind of stood out for me was the rock your role statement and the presentation that you talked about from the John Wooden Institute. I guess I would just encourage or hope that we can continue that messaging into the future and kind of make that a consistent or annual message to our students, because that really resonates with me. And I think that's just, as Krista said, just that's the importance of athletics, right? So let's try and continue that. So.
Thank you. And if you follow us on Twitter, I think the week up to the state tournament games, like we definitely highlighted the different roles that people had, whether you were a coach, whether you were a parent, whether you were a player, whether you're on the bench, whether you're a starter. So it's definitely it was definitely a refreshing and eye-opening philosophy that Kathy brought, and I hope to bring her back to campus again soon.
Great, thank you.
Mike, as you know, we've talked about this over the years. I think one of the big issues in youth sports that continues to be a challenge is the age at which we start segregating kids by ability. And when do we start traveling extensively with them? And I don't know that there's a great answer to that because the societal trend continues to move that all those down to a lower age. And so as you move forward with it, for me, that's an important question.
And it's definitely something that's been on the radar of people in the consortium. So, and we've talked about that extensively. And I think what I will do, because you brought it up, the next time we get together, I'll kind of put those in a grid for you, because I think you'd be surprised how many teams do stay balanced for a longer time. They're trying to stay balanced longer. So that's definitely some information I can share.
I'd like to see that, and what the travel expectations are, particularly with our younger students during the school year. We hear a lot about kids burning out and being tired in school because they're doing a lot of stuff. And so getting a shared philosophy amongst our youth sports is important to me.
I agree. Thank you.
Good, thanks. Anything else for Mike? Great, nice presentation, Mike. Thank you very much for that.
You're welcome.
I skipped over E1, the Housing Coalition. I made a mistake. We got that on the agenda, but I didn't get in touch with Karen Vickerson timely enough to notify her of that. So she's unavailable tonight for that. That's my fault. We're going to schedule her for the first meeting in July. So expect to have a report from them at that time. E3, financial report on Forest Edge, and I think that's Andy.
It is. So just giving everyone a little bit of a report on kind of where things are. The important thing is we remain on budget. We're actually doing a little bit better than we had anticipated for a couple of different reasons, which I talk about in the agenda item. So we give you a quick spreadsheet that just shows kind of where the revenues are. We were able to make almost or a little bit over actually $800,000 in interest revenue when interest rates were a little bit better than they are right now. So luckily we had locked in a lot of those funds when interest rates were a little bit higher, and still have some projected revenue out there. Very, very minor, but there are still several $1 million sitting in the bank account. And then kind of going through a lot of different categories that we've distributed the funds into. Some of those categories have different people that are managing those allocations. Findorf being the largest one with the construction budget, but things such as the technology budget, those types of things are being managed by, for instance, Josh Weiss at the Director of Technology position. So I'm just available for any questions, but right now things are going well. I will share that this budget will probably remain open for about a year or maybe a little bit longer. Our last project we anticipate right now is a fiber project, which will be running from the new school to what's called the Madison Unified Fiber Network. And we'll be doing that next year along MM to connect to that area so that we can save some money on internet connectivity for the future. So with that said, if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Andy, on that fiber, that's a line item that looks like we have almost all that budget still in play. Would you anticipate that what we have balanced remaining on 931 would be sufficient to cover the costs of that remaining open item?
We think it'll be pretty darn close. So we're going to be starting to pay it in this month. We just completed the project this last month and had a couple of the fibers that weren't lit or that were lit that weren't connecting. We fixed that late last week. So we're just kind of going through the punch list of things. So we'll be making some significant payments probably in the next week or so on that project, but there will remain some dollars available so that we can make that last leg to the Muffin Network. The budget's probably close. We do have a couple things that are unknown yet. The city of Fitchburg let us know about 2 weeks ago that even though they told us we could put a box someplace, they now would like us to move it. So we're going to be talking to them about that. And then, and obviously the we haven't bid out the second run of the project yet. So our consultant feels like we have an amount of money there that should be sufficient, but we need to bid that out. So, but I would say right now, yeah, it should be, it's adequate.
Yeah, the reason I asked partly was because of how long we keep our owner contingency in place, or whether or not there's some other areas that we could look to utilize that for.
That owner contingency, I think, will be moving to different line items. We left that there because that's what's in Findorf's contract. But as we continue to go toward occupancy, that line item could shift down into other items for us. So you're very astute to identify that.
Okay. Any questions for Andy?
I just have a quick question about that fiber line. Does that allow then do we have a fiber connection to the rest of the schools from the new school?
Yeah, back in, I believe, and John can correct me, it was like 94, I think. This district was ahead of the curve with a lot of other districts and ran fiber to all of our buildings. And so when we built Rome Corners, we also did that. And we had this built into this budget right from the get-go to bring fiber there. It was shortly after that, and John was really the architect of this idea, that we found a way to connect to this Madison Unified Fiber Network. And basically we'll get 10 years of service for free at whatever speed we want to put on the fiber. So it's a significant savings. We spend about $2,000 a month right now for fiber connectivity. We'll get 10 times the speed at basically zero cost once we have this installed after next year.
Thank you.
Any other questions of Andy?
Yeah, Andy, just one quick question. You mentioned we had about $800,000 in interest income, and we've got about $300,000 of unallocated funds. How much interest income did we budget for? Because surely now we've got less dollars and way less interest.
Yeah.
What did we budget for?
In interest revenue, I was running in the back of my head, we were anticipating around $600,000. So the numbers kind of play out. Now, I would say, as Steve mentioned, that $200,000 in owner's contingency, that's probably going to come into, it's probably not going to be utilized there. So it may move down to our unallocated fund area sometime in the next couple months.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Anybody else? Thanks, Andy.
You bet.
Seeing this form, I anticipate over the next several months as we move forward with closing out Forest Edge.
You bet.
Okay, great. That'll take us to E4 2020-21 Academic Planning Committee update. And John, that's you.
Yeah, I think I'm going to call on Katie, the slide deck driver, again for this, if you have something to share. Otherwise, I can. I'm going to kind of approach this in a couple ways. We have formed an academic planning committee, and we are going to be, we're in progress already, but the idea for this is that we're going to be making a plan for return to instruction in the fall. We got a bunch of feedback from people. So we basically did this in a couple ways. We asked leadership teams to represent their staff. And so we got nice lists from each building about what the staff felt were areas that were effective, and basically, what worked well and what things need to be improved. We also sent surveys out. So all parents received a survey from the district office. Actually, it was the second one. We sent one after our first week of distance learning, which I reported on a while back in March, which seems like 5 years ago. And then we just sent one out at the end of our distance learning last week. And so that we sent out, that out to 9,000 parents and got a lot of feedback on that. We also the district office sent one to all the teachers in the district, or I should say educators, because it's not just teachers, but anybody who's kind of involved in the instruction part. And then we asked teachers, or in some cases like the schools, but either schools or teachers, to survey students directly. The reason for that is because, you know, if we were to send out a survey to students and have all of them reply to our survey, and then we aggregated that and shared it back to teachers, that wouldn't do a lot of good because you'd have them all mixed together. And also we figure, you know, the best way to get the actionable items to teachers is to have them get it directly from the students they're working with. So we haven't aggregated all of that data from students, but we did ask some staff to give us some of the themes and trends that they identified from students. And so we've put together a little bit of that. So that's basically how we got the feedback that I'm going to share now. So the themes from parents, overall, our rating was really high on a scale of like 1 to 5. You know, we're in like the 4 or 4.2 or something range. So 5 being the best and 1 being the worst. So they thought we did a great job, all things considered. And the main positives were that they thought it's really obvious that teachers care about students, you know, and that's so true. I mean, teachers went above and beyond, you know, trying to find resources, ways to connect. And obviously we had to shift many times with what we could do, compared to what we wanted to do. And also another positive was that the real-time video conferencing on Google Meet really maintained connections. A lot of parents said that was really helpful when it worked. Now, obviously, that wasn't an option all the time, and a few people pointed that out. But in general, they said that was really helpful. Another positive was the checkout Chromebooks to make sure that every kid had a device that worked pretty well for them. We checked out about 1,200 of them to people, so obviously it was pretty popular, and parents really appreciated that. The improvements, the biggest one, I believe, was from parents. They said to make the experience more consistent. And this takes 2 forms. One is to have common platforms and tools, meaning, you know, if you have a high school student, for example, because I have 2 of them, you know, not having like 5 different platforms where they have to look for their assignments, but to make it pretty streamlined. And so we've addressed that by saying that next year, Google Classroom is going to be the standard learning management system where people will get assignments. And with the exception of K2, which will be able to use Seesaw, which easily allows teachers to send little videos to students to explain what the activity is, because people, you know, students at that age are not nearly as good at reading directions as they are to listening to or watching a video of their teacher explaining something. So common platforms, common tools. So we're narrowing those down and establishing a few that we're going to standardize on. We've bought licenses for those as needed. Google Classroom is actually free, but we purchased licenses for Seesaw. And we're providing technical training for teachers on those tools. We're also providing some professional development on best practices for distance learning to make sure that everyone's using that in a really effective way. The other part about consistency that we heard loud and clear from parents was we need similar expectations for student work between teachers in the same school and between schools. So there were just, you know, when we rolled this out, everybody was doing what they thought was best. We established some basic standardization and some consistent expectations, but those were pretty broad. And it became clear that even within people following those expectations, it would be helpful if there was even more similarity and more consistency about that. Some of those things were the amount of time that was expected. And some of that was the various practices between different schools. So we are working diligently on that to find some of those consistencies. Another one was to streamline the communication. Parents said, hey, we really appreciate you communicating, but sometimes there is just too much of it from too many different sources. Part of that is due to the different platforms and tools people were using. For example, if you had students at different schools, one might communicate with you using Blooms, and one might communicate using Seesaw, and then one might be using Campus Messenger. And if you have a student in the upper grades, you might have teachers from different classes using different tools, Remind and Campus Messenger and a web page and a Google Doc. So we're going to try to streamline that. And even well before this happened, actually since last fall, we've had a group working on standardized communication tools for the district. And so we had been trying to focus on just a few platforms, and that takes on even more importance right now. Other things that parents said is they need some training on tools that students are expected to use if the parents are going to help them. So we took that to heart. That's mainly for younger children because to some extent older, but the older students are, the less they tend to seek out help from their parents. And the other thing was to teach time management and organization to students. It became really obvious that students are pretty used to a bell ringing every 45 minutes and telling them to move to the next thing, or without a teacher there to tell them to stay on task. They did not necessarily have those skills embedded. So that was a big request from parents. And we responded to some of these during distance learning. For example, the middle school started publishing out visual organizers for students and explaining, here's how you organize your work. Here's how you set milestones. So some of those we did, but that's one of those things that we need to do. Next, I think, is themes from staff. And so positives here, one is just, we've heard this over and over, relationships are key. When a student is on the other end of a computer screen, there's not a lot you can do to make them work, other than the fact that if you have a good relationship with them, you can be supportive and convince them, and they do it. Also, being able to video conference helped maintain connections. That was really helpful. Staff really appreciated being able to help students one-on-one, either with a phone call or a video conference. That was just, it was kind of surprising, but that came up as one of those things that they really missed being able to do in person. And so it was good to be able to use technology to do that. From staff, also the 1 day a week to collaboratively plan and give students a chance to catch up was super helpful. We were pretty much overwhelmed with meetings. And it was good to have that day when we could focus more on meetings so that we could be free to respond to students on those other days. And one of the reasons we were so overwhelmed with meetings was because of a good thing. Colleagues were able to collaborate who normally couldn't. If you didn't have common planning time with your colleagues or with the team because of the school schedule, all of a sudden, without that school schedule, you could probably collaborate more. And so we saw a lot more people making connections, which is a great thing. So that was actually a positive. The improvements are very similar to what the parents told us. The teachers said we need more training on some of these tools. We need more time to prepare. Obviously, we didn't have a lot of time with the unexpected pandemic and how quick. I mean, we knew it was coming, but we didn't know it was coming nearly that fast. Teachers also said they wanted parents to know how to use the tools. Teachers actually brought up the need for a consistent grading policy, and there were a lot of discussions about that. So I think we're wrapping our arms around that one and trying to work with people to have a consistent philosophical understanding and also some guidelines that will provide a lot more consistency there. A big thing we realized right away is we need a method to get materials to K2 students and interact with them. And that's what's driving that adoption of or purchase of devices for K2 that Andy talked about. And the other improvements from staff was that it's hard to give students help when they need it. And this was primarily because teachers don't know when a student's confused, because if you're there with them in the classroom, you can see the quizzical look on their face, or you can see that they didn't get things done. And students aren't used to reaching out when they don't know what's going on or when they need help. And so it's sort of a habit we need to teach them, is to be more proactive and to reach out more quickly, because there are a lot of teachers who are just so eager to help, but they can't see if somebody's confused. And so they need students to, ask them. And so that's another thing we kind of need to teach students. And then the last theme is from students. Positives that we heard a lot were, hey, I can work at my own pace. Some were like, hey, this is great. I don't have to start work until noon, which we didn't exactly encourage, but it's true. They liked it. Another thing we heard was not as much busy work. And you got to take that with a little grain of salt, because some things they think might be busy work, we might think are pretty valuable, but it is what they told us. And another one was they can spend extra time on things you like. And this doesn't necessarily mean non-academic things. This was more like, hey, I really want to pursue this. Like there's a the phrase "go for 4," because when we're using the standards-based grading or proficiency-based, you can get a 1, 2, 3, or 4. 3 is considered proficient. 4 is going above and beyond. And so there were some things that students said, well, I'm really going for a 4 on this one because I've got a bunch more time and I like digging into this, so I'm going to go for 4 on this. Improvements. K2 students, and this was from parents and teachers on behalf of students, is that K2 students need more than written directions. Again, that's why we want to use Seesaw and give out the devices to facilitate that communication. Students were overwhelmed by long-term projects. We heard this a lot when it came to social emotional learning, with students having higher levels of anxiety and stress. And then the lack of time management and organizational skills, which I already talked about, and the absence of bells, which is also a cause of being overwhelmed by long-term projects. Procrastination was actually a huge one. That I put that into lack of time management. But at the high school for a while there were many failing grades from the students who hadn't turned things in. And teachers got really overwhelmed in that last week by tons of people turning things in. And so that lack of time management was a big one, setting milestones and getting things in on time. Other improvements, a lot of students just said, hey, we miss seeing friends, that social aspect, which totally you get. And we've been trying to think of good ways to do that. There were some teachers who, facilitated, they use their office hours as a way to let students discuss things together. Other students pointed out that some teachers adjusted better than others to online learning. Variety of different ways that happened. I think some just were like, well, it's kind of the same things that we got before, but they're, telling us. Others, did a great job of really adjusting, but given the timelines, it was really hard, to make a major adjustment. Another thing that they asked, and this came mostly from parents, was to say that time expectations should be coordinated among teachers, which parents said, but then, students kind of told us that too, like just students who I've talked to, either my own or students, from the neighborhood or from, friends who've contacted us, that, sometimes it seemed like they didn't, all the teachers in a certain grade level team or grade level or whatever didn't always know what each other were assigning. And so sometimes it led to some fluctuations. And again, it was harder to get immediate help. So the academic planning team is taking all that into consideration, and we are about 50 staff, which is a great turnout. And we are planning for multiple scenarios. We're planning for 100% in person, which is kind of the way historically we've gone to school in the fall. We're planning for, on the other end of the spectrum, 100% distance learning, where nobody comes back to school for whatever reason. And then we're planning for blended learning, which is various percentages of students in school. And that's why we're eagerly waiting for guidance from Dane County Madison Public Health to find out what their recommendations are. Because when we have limits on class size or percentage to either stop the spread or be able to engage in contact tracing, that's going to have a lot of implications. So we are focusing mostly on blended learning, and we have a very comprehensive plan to do that. We're using a lot of resources and planning documents from various organizations that excel in this sort of thing. And our plan is to deliver, or our goal, our mission is to deliver a plan for all the areas of instruction. So we have sub-teams created for all the things listed below there and a few more. And we have a distributed communications system where I meet with team captains every week, and the team captains meet with their teams. And so it's hard to not get everybody in the room together at once. On the other hand, even if we could, we wouldn't want 50 people all in the room together at once, because that's probably not going to be efficient communication no matter what. So some of these parts, because some of the teams know that they need to be done or wrap it up in June and pass off their recommendations to other planning teams in order to do their work. And we will be publishing our return to instruction plan we're planning on early August. Although, like I said, we're going to be doing some implementation along the way, because we can't wait till August, to find out from the from the curriculum team, which curricula work well for blended learning. and then all of a sudden have our professional development team figure out what professional development is needed to implement those. So that's my overview. I talked quickly. Please feel free to ask questions about anything that you.
Going once, going twice.
Wow, John, it's amazing all the things that are going on behind the scenes, for lack of a better term. It's I knew somebody had to be orchestrating, and between, the administrative team has just done such a great job keeping the ball moving. I have my brother and his wife are teachers, and their districts are really struggling with this stuff. And they really don't know what they're going to do. And I don't think they're doing a lot of planning yet for the fall. They just finished school, and there's a big sigh of relief that they finished distant learning. And I from my brother's perspective, and he's been teaching for 30 years, he doesn't feel any other emotion but relief. And so I really got to hand it to you. Thanks for your leadership.
It is a team effort. We are all working together on this.
Thanks, Tim. Anybody else?
Just an observation, a statement, John. Under your staff item, you commented on all the collaboration that was going on, and that's certainly something that I observed with Kelly being at home for the past 3 months. Is all of the collaboration that was going on. I mean, she would be on Zoom meetings constantly with all the different teams and working collectively to determine how to best educate students. So it's just an interesting observation that I made, that when we remove the barriers from teachers being able to collaborate, just how much they naturally would do it. And when we're in the in-person settings where teachers are supervising students all day, they don't have the ability to collaborate like they do in the virtual setting. So just an interesting observation, and something to think about as we continue to discuss these things. So
the only other thing I would add is I just really want to compliment all of you on the communication piece and really keeping everyone up to date on everything from instruction to picking up of instruments to food delivery to getting your stuff from your lockers at the end of the school. You guys have done an amazing job of keeping this community up to date about what you know, what you don't know, what they can do, how they can get answers. So really well done on the communication piece as well.
Well, that all goes to Andy, Erica, Leslie, and the principals. I've been trying to narrowly focus just on academics, so I was not involved in any of those pickup things. They did go really well for us, but I want to make it clear that I'm trying to avoid scope creep. So all that awesome stuff that was involved with pickup is totally other people.
Great, thanks. Anybody else? If not, thanks, Sean, for a nice report. Keep up the good work. You got a busy summer ahead of you. Okay.
Thanks.
Next item is 2020-2021 operations plan update, and I think that's Andy.
Yep. Hopefully this works here. I'm working on presenting it. And there we go. Excellent. So we are just getting going on the operations planning committee because, as John just said, we just finished kind of our last activity last Thursday, which was getting the students materials that were kind of left, unfortunately, very in a situation where they didn't know they were coming. They didn't know that they weren't coming back, and getting that home safely to everybody. So we got great guidance from the Dane County Department of Health and utilized that guidance. We had an administrative team that came up with all the plans, and each individual school was able to kind of make that plan their own as far as how we were going to do that. But with the same criteria, we wanted to have the same experience for parents when folks came and picked it up. So last week we had all the schools had those pickups at the same exact times. We had some evening hours for parents that were working so that they had an opportunity to come as well. Besides a little rain on Tuesday evening, everything went pretty well. And we used the proper precautions from Dane County to reduce the spread of, or prevent the spread of COVID-19. And this week we're spending, we took the materials that we got back from all of our parents and our students and put them in a segregated area, and then gave them the 3 days that they told us they needed to make sure that if there was a virus on any of those materials, it would be dead. And now we, this week, are starting to clean those materials. So the next kind of round of our group, which is more of an operationals focus, has 3 subcommittees, and I'm going to just talk real briefly about those committees and kind of their focus and the composition of those committees that we see. Some people have been already asked to be on the committees. Some people haven't yet, so but we'll walk through that real quick. So the 3 committees are food service, transportation, and then facilities. Food service, obviously we want to provide a nutritious, healthy meal to our students next year, and whatever format that takes. One of the leading things that we're hearing is that it may be in classrooms if we're able to be present. We've come up with a 14-member committee at this point in time. We are looking to, in all these committees, look for people that can play multiple roles. So especially parents. We don't have specifically a parent on the committee, but we are looking to have teachers or administrators or buildings and grounds directors who have students that are also kind of playing that dual role if they can. So we do try to have a lot of participation from the people that are actually going to be doing the actual work. So in this situation, we have 3 cooks. We do have good representation from our nurses, our school nutrition director, et cetera. And then principals who really make this thing happen. I thought I had included, but maybe not on this slide. We try to, on the different committees, have different representation from different schools, but also make sure that the levels are all represented as much as possible. Here, I guess I did. I just didn't in that last one. For transportation, we have contractors involved, and both, or actually all 3, both regular education transportation, students with special need transportation, and then also trip transportation will be important to have represented. School administrative assistant or head secretaries, they're hugely important in getting kids in school at the beginning of the year. And then our transportation director, our school resource officer, you might say, well, why is that person involved? We anticipate a significant amount of people not putting their students on the bus this next year. And so we think we're going to have probably some traffic issues around our buildings. And so having a representative from the police department as a part of that to hopefully kind of brainstorm some solutions on how to deal with those types of situations so that we don't have traffic jams in front of our schools will be important. As well as teachers as well. And again, trying to look at people perhaps dealing with or working with students that have special needs of that type of thing, and special education as well. And then our athletic director, again, for those trips, Mr. Carr volunteered to be on that committee as well. Facilities, we think this will be a large component of the process as well. We are looking at head custodians to make sure that we are doing the necessary cleaning that has to happen throughout the day, as well as, again, getting input from the nurse, our buildings and grounds director, again, our athletic director, who has some interesting challenges ahead with large groups of people potentially in our facilities, and then getting representation again from our principals and our teachers and our secretary as well. So all the groups, we try to keep around 15 members. After that, it gets a little bit difficult to become a good working group. So we're trying to, especially with Zoom meetings, being able to do that number, not many more than that. And then we had also identified with the facilities group kind of our partners that we work with on a daily basis from our HVAC folks, which will be important to work with them to make sure that we're getting the outdoor air exchanges that we need to make sure that the blend of outside air with the area that we're recycling is good, as well as our supply contractor. We have very good relationships with folks right here in Oregon to help us with that. And then our contracting cleaning crew that comes in the evenings to clean things. So some of our considerations or just things to be thinking about is obviously we want to be coordinating with John's committees, the District Academic Planning Committee. That's going to be really important since we're here to support the work that the teachers are able to do with the students. We're just trying to make logistics of all that work, as well as working with the Dane County Human Services Department, also known as the Public Health of Madison and Dane County. We're still waiting for some, as John kind of mentioned, we're waiting for some significant protocols and directives from them. We anticipate getting those in the next week or two so that we can kind of start building off of them. But we will be, kind of taking direction from them for sure on how we do things and how we're able to do things as we move through the different phases of the virus. And then lastly, something that we have been talking about and working and trying to coordinate with other Dane County and Madison area school districts. We're not sure if we'll be able to coordinate with them, but we all see the need that as many things as possible, if we can keep on the same page, it just helps the general public's understanding of how things are working. So trying to collaborate with them as much as possible. We had multiple meetings on Fridays at different levels of employee groups and all talking with our peers, trying to figure out how we're going to make this work as we move through toward the next school year. So with that said, I will stop presenting and see if anyone has any questions.
Any questions, Andy?
I actually have just one, and I guess maybe this is for John and Andy. I'm wondering at what point before we unveil these, are we potentially getting public input? That's a non-staff person, that's an external point of view, or maybe representation for somebody of a different race, of a different income level. I guess I'm just looking to see if we're having any external input on these things before I'm not saying that people are experts, but they're going to give you external feedback about this. Especially when you talk about food and you talk about transportation and you talk about delivery of education. I think what the
needs from specific groups, and we haven't done that yet. So thank you for the reminder. Depending on the group, most of that comes down to, I think, like we're going to be selective about which groups we're going to ask for that on, because for example, we have a group called Inventorying Interventions. Well, I don't know that's so internal and behind the scenes that I don't know that public would ever really interface with that. But for ones like assessment or curriculum, those are definitely ones that are pretty visible and forward facing, and so those would be the ones that we would do that with. Right now, we've been kind of trying to take the survey data that we've already gotten, and we need to sharpen our tools a little bit in being able to do a better job of identifying some more demographic information on those. And so I think part of the charge, we do have actually one of the teams that is in the instructional or academic planning team is equity. And so their charge is basically to figure out how they can continue to continue the disruption of the way we've done things the way we have before. And so that's one of the big things that they're doing is finding ways to get that representation from, people, and not just say, well, we sent out a survey, they better have done it, but to be actually intentional about saying, do we have, input and perspective from, these certain demographics who are typically not the ones who are going to, show up or email us or, fill out a survey. So, but you're right. We can't rely just on the equity team to do that. We need to do that in other areas. So we will be putting that. It's on our list, but we need to probably do a better job of figuring out, who do we reach out to and get that from.
Any other questions of Andy? Okay, thanks, Andy. Good luck on working through all that. There's, again, a lot of work to be done through that. All right, going to F, closing. I have not been able to work with Leslie, who will be in her first meeting as superintendent in July with us. So we've got to get together and do the agenda. I know we're going to have the Housing Coalition report in July, but if anybody has anything else for the July meeting, let me know or Leslie know. Checkout. Any board member have anything that they want to check out at this point? Hearing none. All right, I'm going to skip over number 3. And Brian, superintendent report, some informational items for that consideration.
Dr. Bergstrom, do you have anything you'd like to share?
I do. I'll just make a couple of very brief announcements. And the first is an acknowledgement of very significant staffing changes that we made to our administrative team just recently. Darcy Krieger will become, starting July 1st, the Assistant Director of Learning and Student Achievement. Cindy Olander, July 1st, will become the Principal of RCI. And Anna Seidenstricker, July 1st, will become the Principal of Brooklyn. So as I mentioned in my weekly update, the power of our administrative intern program is on full display, because we are able to, through that program, really cultivate the strengths of people who are already very committed to our district. And now we get to have a really great opportunity to bring in a new associate principal to RCI. So we'll have an opportunity to perhaps bring in someone from outside our system, or perhaps we get very fortunate and there's someone else within our district who wants that position. I also wanted to mention that we sent a superintendent report. Anything Brian wants to add?
Thank you, Dr. Bergstrom. I have 3 quick items, board members. First, we all missed yesterday's graduation for the class of 2020. This will certainly go down in the history of our school district and, of course, across the nation. Our hope is that we can have a graduation celebration sometime in July, in the month ahead. My second item, I continue to have great confidence in the district's ability to take actionable steps on the district's anti-racism position. I appreciate the board and the work of the policy committee and all the comments that were made tonight relative to the hate speech policy. And that is important work, and work that I know will continue to be moved forward. And then lastly, the team, and I include that to be larger than the administrative team, the entire school district team is working diligently on next year to address the pandemic and its impact on the 2020-21 school year. And as you can see, the process is in good hands. You heard several high-profile reports tonight. The team is leading on a number of important issues, and I know that's going to continue and put us in the best situation possible, because we have the privilege of serving 4,000 plus students and our families in the community, and we know that's only going to continue to grow in the years ahead. So I would urge everyone to continue to be patient and flexible as we work our way through this unprecedented process. So with that, I will stop and see if you have any questions.
Any questions of Brian? All right, now we're going to get to the point that Brian hates, because I didn't run this past him when we set the agenda, but it's in the honor of Dr. Brian Bussler, District Superintendent. So today, you guys, we normally get cake at these things. And so once again, I sent out, my wife and I delivered cupcakes to everybody in lieu of cake. And so the district office folks and board members got cakes. Erica and Leslie, you've got cupcakes here that Katie's minding, and she's been told not to get them, okay? Eat them. So cupcakes have been distributed, and Brian got 2, one for Brian and Jane. I've been asked by the village to read the following. Proclamation honoring Dr. Brian Busler for dedicated service on the library board and to the Oregon community. Whereas Dr. Brian Busler began serving as a library board trustee for the Oregon Public Library in August 2006 and will end his tenure on June 30th, 2020. And whereas Dr. Brian Busler has demonstrated strong leadership in the roles of library board president from July 2011 to June 2014, July 2017 to June 2018, and vice president from January 2008 to June 2011, and from July 14th to June 27th. Were you never not an officer on the library board? Okay. Dr. Brian Busler.
You miss a meeting, that's what happens.
Yeah.
That's right. Let that be a lesson.
Between the Oregon School District and the Oregon Public Library to serve students of the Oregon area in his dual roles as superintendent of the Oregon School District and library and board member since August of 2006. And whereas Dr. Brian Busler has conscientiously and capably served the Village of Oregon in the Oregon School District and has been dedicated to the highest principles of service, and whereas throughout his tenure, Dr. Busler has worked collaboratively with fellow library trustees and library staff on many enhancements to the library services, including ongoing efforts to plan for the new Oregon Public Library. And whereas Dr. Busler will be greatly missed by Library Director Jennifer Way, library trustees, village trustees, library staff, village staff, and community members, now therefore be it resolved that we, the trustees of the Oregon Village Board and the Oregon Library Board, join together in expressing our sincere and grateful appreciation to Dr. Brian Busler for his years of dedicated service on the library board and to the community, and we wish him the best of luck and good health. Passed by the Village Board, signed by the Village Board President Jeannie Carpenter, passed by the Library Board, and signed by the Library Board President. So Brian, on behalf of the village, they've asked me to give this to you tonight. Thank you. It's hard to believe that 15 years ago, a group of 7 of us sat together and started sifting through resumes to succeed, a person to succeed, a very tough act to follow, Linda Barrows. And so that was one process that really brings boards together, and that board 15 years ago got to be really close, and I think we had a special relationship with Brian. So Brian, we have a little video.
Hey, Brian. 14 years. Can't be possible. But thank you so much for the work that you've done on behalf of our community and our students over that period of time. You've helped us through some very rocky and challenging times, and I'm grateful, as the other members of our community, for the work that you've done on behalf of our students. I wanted to share with you a couple of the things that I felt were really important in your leadership and why you were so successful and why we were so lucky at hiring you, Brian, as you worked on our behalf. First thing I wanted to mention was the work that you did towards the improvement of the students of color in their educational performance in our schools. Boy, we started this about 10, 12 years ago, and it was extremely valuable for us to be able to get into the issues. I think it probably emanated and it was most important when we started seeing it in expulsions. We were seeing microaggressions. This is after we had cameras, you might recall, in the hallways. So valuable for us to understand what was going on in students' minds and what was happening to them, particularly for our students of color and our white students as well, as we addressed issues of race. Then not only did we have great discussions at the board about the work of the expulsions, I know how valuable that was for the families who were experiencing some dysfunction at the time and were able to come to the board, and we were able to seek proper solutions that would help those children be able to get back on the right path. It was so valuable, Brian, and thank you for that. In addition to that, we established the Schools of Hope committee meetings, which were a wonderful opportunity for community members and staff to come together to talk about issues that we were seeing of educational performance for our students of color. And in addition to that, we were able to focus on the numbers through the many meetings that you had throughout the district and with the board about the performance of our students of color and how valuable that was to be able to raise our graduation rate at the same period of time we were going through some rocky times. I don't think the rest of the district probably has seen you as I had seen you also in the many other community meetings that you did on behalf of Dane County. You met with other business leaders, you met with other educational leaders, you met with Tony Evers, who was in charge of the education department at that time, and was so valuable for you to tell the stories and to help others understand what we were facing as a smaller district in the state compared to some of the other districts in Dane County. Number two, I want to thank you for the hiring and the training and the development of your staff, particularly your administrative team. What a strong group of people those were, and it was a pleasure to watch them having the experiences and doing the development of the task that you gave them so that they could turn into even stronger leaders. And so proud of the fact that one of our own is becoming superintendent with your changing of the guard. So thank you so much for the work that you did in hiring and training people and developing them into very good leaders. I always admired your administrative team and how well they work together. And then finally, I'd like to comment on maybe the most important thing, and that is your ability to lead strategy development through both the development process as well as through the implementation process. A lot of people don't have the ability to switch from one to the other, and you did. First of all, we had a tremendous amount, and you allowed and encouraged a great amount of community engagement. So we met with parents, we met with teachers, we met with kids, we met with staff, we met with other community members, we met with other community leaders, the other municipalities, so that we could better understand what they were thinking and they could help get us an idea of what we were thinking at the same time to try on some ideas. And that was so helpful because then you encouraged us to come together as a board. You provided us with books, you provided us with data, you provided us with access to expertise, so that, and especially the time that we needed to have the conversations that would help 7 people come together and say, this is where our district needs to go, and here are the thoughts on implementation for how the district needs to get there. And without that, we would not have been as strong. It was extremely valuable time for us, for you, for the district to have been able to do that. And then once we had that figured out, then we wrote a position paper, and you supported that completely and gave us feedback on that and vetted it with other people as we tried to come to grips with some of the finer points of what that strategy was going to look like, if not some of the implementation and how that was going to look like. So important for you to have been there at the cusp of that so you could be able to help us with that strategy development. And then after the position paper was done, you took it and you implemented it. You disseminated it, you taught it, you made sure that others were teaching it in the district, whatever that new thing was going to be, and helping others understand it. And then you kept your focus on that. One of the tools that you had that I thought was just terrific was your minder. Do you remember that? Do you still use it? Big piece of paper, lots of boxes, the things that you really need to keep focus on, and particularly the implementation of the strategies that we knew were going to be most important to propel district financial stability and educational performance and development of people. Wow, was there anything more important? So thank you for all of that. I'm so appreciative, so grateful that you came to work for us 14 years ago. You were the right man for the job, and so pleased that we were able to improve financial stability, improve our educational performance, to be able to work on our growth, and finally to be able to make sure that our children had the very best starts in life following high school. That would not have been done without you. None of this work would have done without you, Brian. You made the difference here. And the community, the board, we're all so grateful for what you did for our district. Thank you.
Brian, congratulations on your retirement from the Oregon School District. It has truly been a pleasure getting to know you and having worked with you throughout the years. You know, a little over 14 years ago when we started our search for a new superintendent, a lot of good people sent in their profiles. Well, one professional profile that stood out amongst them all, well, that wouldn't belong to you. Well, after some on-site interviews in Oregon, after a trip to Beaver Dam, we knew we had our person. In April of 2006, you agreed to join us as our next superintendent. The rest, shall we say, is history. You know, the most important job that a board member has is that of hiring a superintendent. Those are just words, though, until you actually go through the process and get to enjoy the outcome of a great selection. And Brian, you were a great selection. You did a fantastic job, and you will be missed. Your love of community, your commitment to culture, your drive for competency, your character, those things will all have lasting effects for years to come. Brian, you made a difference. So thank you. I appreciate all of your hard work. I wish I could be there in person. We all wish we could be there in person. When we get through this, our paths will cross, and I can thank you personally. But for now, this is going to have to do. Brian, again, thanks for everything. Best of everything. Enjoy your retirement.
Brian, congratulations on your retirement from the Oregon School District. I hope you have wonderful plans in place for the next stage of your life. When you thought about coming to Oregon, I'm sure you envisioned some likely challenges, but none like we've had in the past year of your tenure. Throughout your term as superintendent, you've led our district to be forward-looking, child-focused, and most of all, a great place for staff and students. Thank you for all that you have done for Oregon. You have made a difference.
Hey Brian, it's JC Boldbuck. Wanted to send you a message thanking you for your 14 years of service to our schools and our community, and to wish you a happy, healthy retirement, well-deserved. I hope it is full of good health and family and friends and as much golf as you can fit in a day. Thank you. Congratulations and bye-bye.
Congratulations, Brian, on your retirement. You have richly deserved this opportunity. You certainly earned the chance to spend more time with Jane, with your family, with your friends, doing the things that you love. You know, you had a tough act to follow. This was a district that was thriving, and still we were trying to get greedy as a school board and try to identify a leader that could take us to the next level of excellence, that could be forward-looking, anticipate what is coming, and meet the needs of our students every single day. And you have done that with extraordinary grace, passion, and poise over many, many years, and we are so grateful. Congratulations, Brian. Thank you for all that you've done. You've really made a difference.
Brian, congratulations on your retirement, and really thank you for your leadership over all these years in the Oregon School District. I remember sitting in that little conference room in Rome Corners, was that 15 years ago, and thinking, who is this guy who takes so long to think about the answers to the questions we're posing to him? And now I understand, after all these years of working with you, that that guy is a really thoughtful, caring, deep thinking individual. And those characteristics really led the school district into bigger and better places. So I can't tell you how much I appreciated working with you all these years, what a joy it was, how much I learned from you, and how much you're going to be missed. Your legacy is going to live on for a long time, not just in the buildings that were built during your tenure, but really in the way that you've changed how everybody views education in the Oregon School District, and how those values, those core values that you helped develop, really have become the focus of everything that's done in Oregon. So thank you again for your leadership, and enjoy your retirement. I hope you catch lots of fish out there on your fishing boat. And please know that you really did make a difference in the Oregon School District for so many people. So thank you.
Great, thanks. Those were, our video didn't track quite accurately here. but those were the 6 members of the Oregon board. I was the 7th, and I've written about Brian and done the retirement video, so I'll spare you that, other than say I'm going to miss the guy on my lap. Tim.
Oh man, how do I follow that? That's just so many recurring themes though, as you can tell. So I will be quick. I just wanted to say a few words as well, and I jotted a few things down. So if I refer to my notes, I'm just referring to my memory, my written memory. First of all, thank you for your leadership. For many of you, maybe not for all, but for many of you, Brian came from other districts, and he used that time so wisely to our benefit. We just knew the nearly perfect Brian. We didn't see the mistakes and the learnings he had along the way because he came to us fully trained. And I really admire that. I admire all the best practices, as you call it, that you brought to us. Secondly, I want to thank you for your patience. A couple of people already mentioned how much time you've taken to just answer some questions. Courtney mentioned that, I know. And I can only imagine that that kind of patience is very similar to fishing, another theme that I heard from some of the others. Interestingly enough, according to Tolstoy, the 2 most powerful warriors are patience and time. And this world has come to a place where they want to see decisions made and things happen. And that's hard to do when you are when you're a superintendent, because your vision is always wrestling with what are you going to do today. Although patience is considered a virtue, it's often underappreciated in leadership. The third thing I want to recognize that I know Brian values is persistence. Like fishing, persistence does not mean you ought to fish in the same spot all day. It doesn't mean that at all. But you do have to keep fishing. After all, the goal is to catch fish. We all know that Brian has been through his share of hurdles. Again, I haven't seen them. And I think he spent a lot of those hurdles on the other districts that he worked for before coming to us. But without question, the most recent hurdle, this whole COVID-19 hurdle, Brian has persisted through it and powered through it. And I'm sure we will never really understand all of the challenges this has created for him. But you stayed the course despite those setbacks. And today, look around. The success in our schools is everywhere. And that is in great part due to you. Lastly, Brian, like fishing, I appreciate the peace that you have always found in doing this job. I'm sure we don't see the less peaceful moments, but I personally have always seen the peace that you have when you come to these meetings or when you thoughtfully answer a question for the 50th time. You have this way about bringing peace to the situation, and it brings others to that same peace. And so, again, I can't help but think back, and it's one thing that you've taught me, your willingness to bring some peace to the situation. So thank you for doing that. My final thought, and I'm going to use someone else's words. Sherry Mitchell wrote this about something that you hold close to your heart, and it's about fishing. So I will replace a few words, and you will be able to know which words I'm replacing. While sitting on the school board, I've met some superintendents who enjoy telling exaggerated tales. Teachers, leaders can be quite animated storytellers. While I don't have any big fish stories to tell from my first term on the school board, I like to think that your experience will leave lots and lots of impressions. about their work with you. The actual act of being a superintendent is a somewhat ancient practice dating back a long, long time. Whether educating or leading our district, working with you has provided me and us with some valuable leadership lessons, including insights on patience, persistence, and peace. So thank you.
Krista, I've asked you to say a couple words.
Thank you. Who knew you'd be bookend by the Flanagans? I mean, but Scott had a lot less.
Hey, that's a good day.
Down below back then. I'll be really, really brief. First of all, I really want to thank our former board colleagues, Brian's first board, who made the very, very strategic decision to hire Brian. We thank them as this board. They all shared a lot of really meaningful thoughts about Brian, his many accomplishments, and truly how fortunate we've been to have him at the helm of our district for more than a decade. So I've just got a few minutes to share my thoughts, and I'm going to touch on one of Brian's other finest qualities, one that I've truly admired, and that is his ability to listen. Peter Drucker, a very well-known management consultant, educator, and author, said this: listening, the first competence of leadership, is not a skill, it's a discipline. All you have to do is keep your mouth shut. While that's really true, I think we all agree there's a little more complexity to that. The Dalai Lama said, when you talk, you're only repeating what you already know, but if you listen, you may learn something new. And finally, listening is really giving the other person the experience of being heard. Brian actually listens, and he has shown that he understands all the merits of listening. How has he responded to concerns, complaints, opportunities, and challenges? By listening first. And not only that, he invites listening, whether it's putting your cell number on everything that the district sends out, or by reaching out to those who've expressed concerns, you call them and you listen. That's a really special gift. I mean, think about all the things that have been mentioned here tonight about Brian's accomplishments. And then think about our student-centered learning approach, having the best teachers in every classroom, and a team of administrators who are invested and feel valued. Managing the board and board members who may drift into micromanagement land, I'm talking about myself, community partnerships, listening, and listening effectively, I believe, has played a critical role in all of those. One of Brian's greatest legacies, I think, could very well be the leadership and the development of our 5 core values, and how woven these values have become into who we are as a district, what we believe, how we do what we do, and why. And how did those come to be? Listening to more than 200 community members in a visioning conference. Brian led that, and we learned from that, and you gave our community the gift of really being heard. So thank you, Brian.
Great. Thank you, Krista and Tim. And I ask those two to speak on behalf of your current board. Tim, I believe you have one other piece of business.
I do. We heard it offered up a little bit earlier today, and I'd like to offer it up one more time. I'd like to make a motion to recognize Brian Bussler with the Making a Difference Award.
And I will second that motion.
Any discussion?
Ms. Flanagan,
Yes.
Ms. Garrison,
Yes.
Mr. Mary,
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz,
Yes.
Ms. Deja,
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun,
Yes.
Mr. Zach.
Yes. And with that, the motion carries. Brian, you made a difference. You get the last word.
Okay, I'm gonna make this really short. First, thank you for your comments and arranging this special agenda item tonight. Please know that while it was greatly appreciated and clearly from the heart and very moving for me, it also wasn't necessary, because the payment that I've been able to receive over the years has been working in a superb district and also having education for my kids. I hope to surprise you with my brevity of comments. My comments relate to saying thank you to everyone that I've worked with, whether it's a parent, a community member, a board member, a faculty or staff member, everyone in the greater Oregon community. I also want to say thank you to Dr. Linda Barrows. She was as the story was told to me, number 3 in 80 years. So that would make me number 4 in 95 years. And that would make Dr. Bergstrom number 5 in her next 25 years. So I hope you were, Leslie. Dr. Barrows graciously shared with me her time as I transitioned to the district. I'd also like to say thank you to 2 of my mentors. First, Al Rosenthal, he's the former superintendent in the Wanakee School District, and he mentored me in Sun Prairie. And just to show you how small the world is, he gave my wife her high school diploma in the Johnson Creek School District. He was a fantastic mentor and a fantastic leader. And my other mentor superintendent, you might have heard of him. His name's Governor Tony Evers. He's the former superintendent in Verona and also our state superintendent for a number of years. Governor Evers' office called me, and then they put him on the line after I must have passed the appropriate security test. And he taught me yet another lesson after I retired, or after I announced my retirement. So that was important. I hope the one thing you've learned tonight from our presentations is the school district is team-based. We're team-based on all the work we do. Everything we accomplish, whether it's big or small, during my tenure, it happened because people worked on it. Not because I worked on it, or not because a board member worked on it, but because we all worked on it together. There was probably only one exception to that, and that's snow days. That's not a task force study. Sometimes I made a good call, sometimes I made a bad call. I love the community members that would call me and let me know whether it was a good or a bad call. That was all fun too. I wish we could do a task force at 4 a.m., but we just can't. The greater Oregon community is generous and has supported the school district long before I came, and I am confident they will continue to support the school district in the decades and years ahead as we continue to grow and evolve. In closing, it's 2 really simple words. Thank you, thank you. All of our work has been in service of our school mission and the district's 5 values. This is a great place. Best wishes. I know the sun's going to shine brightly on the Oregon School District in the years ahead. The floor is back to the president.
Thank you, Brian. Well, that was really nice to do. I wish we could have done it in person. I wish we could have a community gathering to honor your 14 years. That will come at the appropriate time when things clear up. So, but we wanted to let you know what we thought and felt in our hearts. So we'll be done by 10 o'clock, board. We've got a couple, just a quick updates for you that we have to go into closed session on. So we'll break. We've got a dial-in number. We're going to go to the other room, right, Katie? So it would be deliberate regarding potential land acquisition in the district pursuant to WSTAT 1985-1E, and then to consider compensation for a district administrator under 1985-1C. So let's sign off of this, quick sign on to the other, and then we'll get this thing closed by 10 o'clock. Thank you, everyone. We're not going to be returning to open session. See you in a few minutes. Brian, for that second item, you're going to be excused.